Good morning. It is Monday morning, Veterans Day, November 11th. 101 years ago, the First World War, the war that was supposed to end all wars, ended. And no, it didn't end all war. But in that time, so many people have served our country, and those are the people I want to remember today, and particularly in this section that we have here, where we have so many serving military members and veterans, just to pay tribute to what you have done and what you do, and to what you have given to the rest of society by your service. It's just very important that we, as a society, as a nation, remember the deeds of those who have served, and it is so important to us that I just want to make sure we start off with that mention. Now, for my regular business of trying to review last week and to come up a little bit of an introduction to our next week's work. Last week we had some readings that did talk about, after our first week, or 2 weeks ago, we looked at more legal forms of business. This time we looked at some issues in the materials about financing forms. So one of the biggest questions is, when you're trying to raise money, do you use debt or equity? Debt, very simply, you've got to pay it back. Equity, you're taking on other owners. Are you financing it yourself? Are you using other people's money? Are you using it wisely? What risks are you taking? And I think these concepts were covered, and you may wonder why we really didn't have a discussion on that, because I think you're going to discover in about 2 weeks we come back to that in a slightly larger sense, so you'll be using the resources that we looked at this week in that sense. And we also looked at a very important thing for many businesses that have a need to discuss their physical location. Well, we looked at location, and a location is important simply because it's not only maybe where do you get customers, but to think about it in a little bit of a bigger picture. Where do I get my workers? Where do I get my suppliers? Where do I have the best legal and or maybe tax environment? It's not just the market that we look at there. So these were important issues, and they will continue to be going forward. Then the other thing I wanted to mention, looking back, is the discussion. And in fact, maybe let's postpone that for a few seconds, and I'll come back to it in a moment. Let's talk about what we're going to look at this week. And this week, again, it's going to be one of those, can you compare two different but highly related ideas? And we're talking about the ideas of marketing and sales. Highly related? Absolutely. Very different? I think you will find that they are. And any company that does not recognize those differences and actually utilize those differences, I think, is limiting itself and its chances for success. So you're going to explore some issues of that. Now, looking again, we often, as we often do in this class, we're not, once again, not making a straightforward progression through the chapters. You're going to be looking at Chapter 7, which is mostly about marketing, and then a kind of an offshoot of it, but relates back to the finance things we talked about last week. Well, we'll look at decisions about pricing and credit. And, a lot of people think of those as just maybe cash flow tools. We understand pricing as a marketing tool or a sales tool. How about credit? Credit is very important, particularly in a small business where cash flow may be absolutely more important or more vital at early stages of the business's life. That, making some decisions that help us in one way may hurt us in another. And that's the relationship I'm asking you to look at. So I'm looking forward to a very interesting week. Now, the most interesting thing I had last week, as you say, might be saying to yourself, well, if we discussed all these important things, why did you go back and talk about strategy and planning again? Well, it was very interesting to me how the discussion evolved. And by the way, it evolved extremely well. I mean, people are asking each other questions, you're challenging each other, you're bringing up your own interpretations of some complex subjects. It really went back and forth. We reached 100 posts, which is pretty good. That's averaging more than 4 a person. That speaks well for what's going on. And many of them were very detailed, and many of them were very thoughtful, and I really, really appreciate that. And you'll notice I said in my introduction last week, in my midweek speech, I didn't intervene and didn't respond to everyone because I do have some very, very strong opinions about the ideas of strategy and planning. I spent a long time of my career actually working with businesses of all sizes to develop strategic thinking processes. In fact, I don't even like calling it strategic planning anymore. I call it strategic thinking. And it is why I asked the questions I did. And it was interesting to me to see that many people's positions seem to have evolved a little bit since the first time we looked at it in the assignment that you wrote about in week 1. So that was interesting. It seemed to me that the consensus, if one started to build one, was that strategy is really hard to do and planning is really detailed, so maybe which one is harder is not the question to ask. One seems to be harder in a conceptual way, the other is a lot more work because that's how you're going to run the business. And in many cases where I did come into the discussion, I asked another question of a number of folks in the class was, do you think there's another level? Do you think there's something else that goes beyond strategy, that goes beyond planning, that maybe dictates how you run your business and how things are? I happen to think there is, and I feel so strongly about that that I'm not even going to put that in this video. I'm going to maybe trick you into watching another one, which I will put up shortly, where I kind of give my views on that issue. But I do think there is a level beyond, and it's something I work on with many companies and with even sometimes with individuals, about the idea of vision and the idea of values and how those affect how we do business. So I just want to congratulate everyone on the exchange of ideas in that discussion. It was great. So that's where we are. We're kind of now taking another important step forward. We're going to look at those all-important issues of sales and marketing. Again, keep in mind how they may differ and how they may intertwine. I hope you're starting to see a pattern of how all these things interweave and work together going forward. Another thing I would like to call your attention to is at the bottom of this week's unit, we actually introduce the comprehensive project for the course, which will be due not this week, don't panic, it's due at the end of week 7. But the introduction and the assignment is presented to you now, so take note of that. And also take the time to get any questions you have, get them to me so we can do a really good job on that. It's something I'm looking forward to see how people do. Once again, I'm going to try to keep to that schedule of getting the discussions graded today and tomorrow, to getting the assignments graded by Thursday. And if you have any questions, I think people have discovered where and when to contact me, and it's working well. Thank you for your attention.